In a world defined by rapid change and media saturation, the most dangerous weapon a ruler can hold isn't really physical force, because force just provokes immediate backlash. But controlling the narrative, on the other hand, quietly rewires what people accept as reality, before dissent even has a chance to form. That is why storytelling has always been an inherently political tool. So today I want to look at how this exact dynamic connects William Shakespeare's King Richard III and Al Pacino's 1996 docudrama Looking for Richard. Despite being separated by 4 centuries and entirely different mediums, both texts operate on a shared premise. Power isn't just seized through physical dominance, it is manufactured through performance, language, and carefully staged representation.
But what makes Looking for Richard more than just a retelling is that Pacino uses the filmmaking process itself to reframe Shakespeare's warning, proving that Richard's mechanics of manipulation are identical to the ones operating on our screens today. Shakespeare introduces this manipulative architecture through the Elizabethan soliloquy. In Act 1, Scene 1, Richard uses high modality to declare, "I am determined to prove a villain." This statement relies on a profound paradox. The word determined implies his death is fixed by fate, yet its high modality highlights his intense personal agency, his deliberate choice to reject morality for power. By framing his villainy as an unavoidable fate rather than a malicious choice, Richard neutralizes moral outrage. Also, by confiding his intentions directly to the audience, Richard transforms us into his confidence, creating a sense of complicity as we understand the manipulations long before the other characters do. The second Clarence walks on stage, Richard executes a linguistic pivot, switching from cynical villain talk to a warm brotherly tone. This proves that for Richard, language is never about truth, but rather about control. Now more than ever, we are constantly being bombarded with warnings about what is fake, what is biased, and what is AI. But when all global information is entirely dominated by a handful of tech monopolies and billionaires, how would you know? Jim Morrison famously noted, "Whoever controls the media controls the mind." Shakespeare's Richard primarily relies on language to manipulate on a physical stage, but Looking for Richard, on the other hand, utilizes not just language but cinematography, helping us to further immerse ourselves into his world of manipulation, something that is clearly demonstrated in the wooing of Lady Anne. Now consider Al Pacino's Looking for Richard. The divine rights of kings is dead, replaced by the authority of the camera lens and celebrity. In the famous wooing of Lady Anne, Pacino translates Richard's psychological dominance into cinema using dark lighting and intense claustrophobic close-ups. By cutting off all visual distance, the camera mirrors how Richard suffocates Anne's ability to resist. However, Pacino's real brilliance is showing the fractured nature of this performance through strategic cuts. The moment Lady Anne spits at him, Pacino breaks the dramatic illusion by cutting to himself in casual clothing, exposing Richard's immediate reaction, "I'll have her." Other than these cuts being annoying, Pacino proves that this on-screen manipulation isn't accidental. It's a carefully manufactured strategy. By doing so, Pacino elevates Shakespeare's script into something more, not just simply showing Richard's manipulation in his language, but also exposing the cold, calculated intent behind it through his use of cinematography. Pacino doesn't just retell Shakespeare, he reframes him, forcing us to see that Richard's manipulation was always deliberate, not just dramatic. He is warning us how complex leaders will, and do, meticulously construct narratives to capture public compliance. Modern media screens work the exact same way, using deliberate editing choices to warp how our minds perceive reality, usually just to fit a specific agenda for their own benefit.
You said that you were going to find a scholar from somewhere who was going to speak directly into the camera and explain what really went down with Richard and Anne. And I am telling you that is absolutely ridiculous.
Just like Shakespeare's Richard, who would build identity through manipulative language and direct communication to the audience, like in his opening soliloquy, Frederick identifies that speaking directly to the camera lens is just like talking to the audience, recognizing that it automatically grants authority to the speaker, regardless of whether the authority has been earned. Unlike King Richard III, Looking for Richard extends this idea into a cinematic context, meaning that meaning is shaped not only by character performance, but by the camera lens itself. When Frederick demands,
"But why does he get to speak directly to the camera?"
he's exposing the mechanics of cinematic power itself. This idea is reinforced when the film cuts to the scholar, only for him to admit,
"I don't really know why he needed to marry her historically. I simply don't know."
Despite having no definitive answers, the camera has already framed him as an expert.
Through this contrast, Pacino reveals how authority can be manufactured through representation alone. Just as Richard dominates the entire play because of his direct and intimate communication with the audience, the camera, in looking for Richard, decides who gets the same privilege, and in doing so, he shows us that modern media operates on exactly the same principle. Looking for Richard ultimately reframes King Richard III, not by changing its meaning, but by proving it never needed updating. He was working in a different world. 1990s America was shaped by a generation that had watched their government lie about Vietnam, and then lie again during Iran-Contra. Simply retelling Shakespeare wasn't enough for an audience like this. By choosing this docudrama form, Pacino never lets us fully surrender to the performance. By constantly exposing the filmmaking process itself, he forces us to see the machinery behind the manipulation, rather than just feel it. Through cinematography, Pacino exposes the cold, calculated intent that Shakespeare could only hint at through words. Through representation, he shows us that authority itself is manufactured, that the camera frames who we trust before they even speak. Both texts are saying the same thing. It was never about what's true. It was always about who controls how it's represented. And in 2026, swimming in algorithmically curated feeds where every leader and institution has a carefully managed public image, that warning has never been more relevant. The only difference is we now have a choice about whether we see it.